Count on LEX 18 News.
Tonight, lawmakers return to the U.S. Capitol to finish their business after getting run out by an angry mob of pro-Trump supporters.
State Senate will not be intimidated. We will not be kept out of this chamber by thugs, mobs, or threats.
From the nation's capital to Kentucky's capital, condemnation after the storming of Capitol Hill.
We have seen domestic terrorists, and that's what they are, storm our U.S. Capitol, something that we would have thought unimaginable.
President Trump remaining silent tonight, his Twitter account locked, his top aides resigning, and his political future in doubt.
Enough is enough is enough.
LEX 18 News at 11 starts now. Good evening, I'm Larry Smith.
And I'm Nancy Cox. Thank you for joining us at 11. A mob supporting President Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol today, clashing with police and disrupting the constitutional process to confirm President-elect Joe Biden's win. Protesters breached security and were seen inside the Senate chamber.
One person was shot and killed and injuries have been reported, but lawmakers were able to resume their work after several tense hours. Alice Barr has details from Capitol Hill.
The nation's capital on lockdown tonight, under curfew, hours after the U.S. Capitol and democracy itself came under siege. One person was fatally shot in 3 hours of chaos after a mob of supporters of President Trump and his false claims about the election surrounded and then stormed the Capitol. The drama unfolded this afternoon as lawmakers had just begun the traditional process of counting electoral votes, confirming Joe Biden's victory as the next president. Vice President Mike Pence and members of the House and Senate forced to take cover as rioters rushed past heavily armed officers, in many cases virtually unchallenged. Some made their way into the well of the House and the Senate, defiantly standing their ground in a place where elected officials had been doing their work only minutes earlier. One lawmaker likened it to crashing the gate of the People's House. President-elect Biden had harsher words.
It's not protest, it's insurrection.
President Trump said little to defuse the powder keg, but after lawmakers returned to count the votes, Vice President Pence led several Republicans in condemning the mob.
To those who wreaked havoc in our Capitol today, you did not win.
They tried to disrupt our democracy. They failed.
An unforgettable day on Capitol Hill and a dark one in this nation's history. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Social media giants Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram all froze President Trump's accounts today for 24 hours after posts that violated their policies. Twitter threatened to make the move permanent if the president keeps breaking the rules. Multiple lawmakers from Kentucky were on the floor in the House and Senate as the chaos unfolded. We saw posts on social media from Representatives James Comer, John Yarmouth, Hal Rogers, and Andy Barr, to name a few, all condemning the violence at the Capitol. Barr said the United States is an exceptional nation because we resolve our differences peacefully through the ballot box, the courts, and our democratic institutions, not through violence, end quote. We also heard from Senator Rand Paul, who said in part, quote, violence and mob rule is wrong and un-American, and it will not bring about election reform. Even though it was more than 500 miles away, what happened at the Capitol in Washington echoed in the halls of the state capitol in Frankfort.
Carolina Buchek talked with Governor Andy Beshear and Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams about their reaction to what we saw happen today.
Thankfully, nothing like what we saw happen in Washington happened here at Kentucky's Capitol today. But there was a certain edge in the air after everyone saw those videos of what was going on at the U.S. Capitol. And tonight was supposed to be a big night here in Frankfort. The governor was supposed to give his State of the Commonwealth address. But after everything that happened, both the governor and Republican leaders agreed that it's best to postpone that. And you could tell there was a different feeling here at Kentucky's Capitol. More security was around, and certain offices within the building decided to evacuate themselves. Now, the building was never shut down officially, but walking through it, there weren't many people inside. Outside of the governor's office, we saw many of his team members walk in and out, and eventually the governor came out and said this attack on democracy will never be okay in America.
We have seen domestic terrorists, and that's what they are, storm our U.S. Capitol, something that we would have thought unimaginable.
Bashir made it clear that leaders in Frankfurt and Washington, Republicans and Democrats alike, need to condemn this attack. And when asked about President Trump's involvement in all of this, here's what the governor said.
I believe that this is a situation that would not have occurred if we would condemn these groups each and every time they commit these acts. You cannot fan the flames and then condemn the fire. Certainly the president right now could speak in a strong voice to get people to leave, to tell them that this election is over and that the importance of the institution of the United States government is more important than any one individual.
And many others didn't find the president's response to the situation helpful. We asked Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams if the president is wrong for saying the election was stolen from him, a claim that is unproven. And here's what he said.
The president needs to show, I think, real leadership. I don't think that his video helped. I think he needs to very clearly say, go home. You made a mistake. This is not acceptable in America. I think he needs to show a lot more leadership than he's shown.
But is he wrong?
I think he's wrong in terms of there being some sort of mass conspiracy to steal the election, yeah.
Adams, the chief elections official in Kentucky, said he's disturbed by the situation at the U.S. Capitol. He says America's democracy and process exists to prevent stuff like this from happening.
The entire reason we even have elections in America is so we don't have what we saw today. So we don't have madness and rule by mob. We're an orderly society, we have a constitution, we have a system. That's more important than any one candidate or any one election is that system and preserving it. And today we've done a bad job of that.
So both the governor and the Secretary of State say it's important to condemn this attack for the sake of our democracy. In Frankfurt, Carolina Butrack, LEX 18 News.
Kentucky lawmakers have spoken out against the actions of those extremists who stormed the Capitol this afternoon. LEX 18's Catherine Collins shares the reactions of both Republicans and Democrats.
Legislators here in Frankfurt tell me they were in committee when they first heard about the storming of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Both Republicans and Democrats are condemning what happened.
It's deplorable. There is never an excuse to incite violence.
Shocked and stunned and saddened.
Republican Senate Majority Floor Leader Damon Thayer and Democratic Senate Minority Leader Morgan McGarvey were joined by other Kentucky lawmakers to say violence will not be tolerated. Senator Thayer says President Trump should have acted faster to respond to the unprecedented breach.
He has the power to shut these things down, to bring in military force.
While Senator McGarvey criticized the president for not condemning the actions of rioters.
You can't fan the flames and then condemn the fire. This is something we all just have to stand strong and say consistently this is wrong.
Both senators say they did not hear of threats to the Kentucky Capitol today and plan to be back tomorrow to continue work for the people of the Commonwealth. So where does this divided country go from here?
We do what we always do as Americans. Law-abiding citizens continue to obey the laws of this country. People who have an issue with what's happening in our country should continue to let their feelings be known in a peaceable fashion.
In Frankfurt, Catherine Collins, LEX 18 News.
Longtime Republican operatives in Kentucky and around the country are denouncing the chaos that unfolded in Washington. LEX 18's Mike Valenti spoke to the former spokesperson for Kentucky's Republican Party, Trey Watson, to get his take.
Early this afternoon, we logged onto Zoom to speak to Trey Watson about the shifting dynamics in the Senate and Mitch McConnell's future role as minority leader. But things changed.
Because this is a rapidly evolving situation, who knows? I could be doing a totally different angle tonight.
Both of us were glued to our TVs, watching the developments in D.C. Watson described them as horrific.
Devastating for the country. It's devastating for me to watch as a Republican. It's embarrassing. It's devastating. It's embarrassing. It's horrific. And it all falls at the feet of the president.
In the hours that followed our call, the outrage online was swift. From Republican advisor and conservative commentator Scott Jennings, and from former Mitch McConnell campaign manager Josh Holmes. And as the situation on Capitol Hill became more untenable, Watson ramped up his criticism of the man he says is responsible, President Donald Trump. He tweeted that the president should be impeached and arrested, and urged the vice president and the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president immediately. Mike Valenti, LAX 18 News.
What's happening today in Washington, D.C. will go down in the history books. The U.S. Capitol hasn't been breached since the British did it back in the War of 1812. It's something that has people who study history watching very closely. Conroy DeLuce spoke with a law professor who says this is a memorable day for many reasons.
We've spoken with Dr. Josh Douglas countless times over the past couple election cycles about laws and procedures. He's a student of history who was also watching closely today from Lexington as the unprecedented events unfolded in D.C. more than 500 miles away from here.
A day which should have been routine, which should have been, normal, known besides, crazy election law professors like me, pay attention to January 6th and the counting of the Electoral College votes.
But on this day, the world was watching as the meeting was interrupted by protesters crashing into the Capitol and Congress was evacuated. Douglas called this a sad day for democracy. He puts the blame for what happened squarely on President Donald Trump and on lawmakers who've been protesting the election results for the past 2 months.
We see the results of a president who refuses to accept that he lost an election, of various senators and members of the House who make up lies and conspiracy theories about phantom voter fraud to try to justify an election that they lost. And, President Trump asked for this and he got what he asked for, and it's really sad.
There have been closer elections than 2020, but Douglas points out that in all prior presidential contests, the loser did concede.
They stood by one of the core tenets of American democracy, that the losers accept defeat, accept a peaceful transfer of power, and go on to fight in the next election. And Donald Trump had told us for months, if not years, that he wouldn't do that. And we're seeing the unfortunate consequences of that today in the Capitol.
Douglas says that he hopes in the near future there is some meaningful voting rights reform that is discussed and passed. But he says what happened today, January 6th, is not just a law problem, it's a politics problem. In Lexington, Conroy DeLuce, LAX 18 News.
Well, before we go to the break, we want to give you a live look at Washington, D.C.
As you can see, authorities are out on Pennsylvania Avenue enforcing that curfew that the D.C. Mayor Miriam Bowser issued when the riot started, beginning at 6 p.m. and goes until 6 a.m., not just in D.C., but also across the river in Alexandria and Arlington, Virginia as well. We'll be right back after this.